YouTube, what is up? James, MTG Biggie here, and if you haven't seen my last video, I would suggest checking it out because it talks about the fact that Jace and Bloodbraid Elf are now legal in Modern. So check that out. I'll link it down below and at the end of this video, and it kind of goes over my thoughts about where Modern is headed with this change and how I think these cards will affect the meta, because they absolutely will. That being said, I've made a list for each of these cards, decks that I think they'll be playable in, and we're going to start with Jace, because everybody knows Bloodbraid is going to be in Jund. It's not as exciting as Jace, and the deck that I have put together for Jace is kind of not the first thing I think a lot of people were thinking about, and I think it's going to be really interesting and kind of really good. So that deck I'm calling Mindsculptor Blue Moon. It is a Blue Moon deck shell with Jace the Sculptor. Sorry. What that means, Blue Moon, for those who aren't familiar, it's a blue control deck with a red splash for Blood Moon. It plays a lot of basic lands, so you could leverage that and have your mana available while your opponents struggle because all of their lands are now mountains. And this deck is a deck that I think has been around for a long time on the fringes of Modern play. It's seen a bit more play now, and it had the win condition of Through the Breach Emrakul or Madcap Experiment, Platinum Imperium, or whatever the hell that card's called, or the Kiki Jiki Deceiver Exarch Pseudo Splinter Twin combo. We're not doing any of that stuff. We are trying to go pure control and grind games out with a combination of Jace and a couple other things. So we'll get into the mana. We're on 8 basic islands, 1 basic mountain. So we have 9 basics. And then we're on 2 Steam Vents and 2 Sulfur Falls, which is pretty standard for these decks. And then a full 8 fetch lands. So 4 Scalding Tarns are a must, because you can fetch out your basic islands, your mountain, your steam vents. And then you can use 4 Polluted Deltas, or 4 Flooded Strands, or 3 in 1, or 2 in 2. However you want to do it, you just need 4 of the other blue fetch land. That's it for the mana, aside from the utility land of Desolate Lighthouse, which allows us to loot, but does get turned off with Blue Moon, or Blood Moon rather. So that is just one of as a utility land. The rest of our mana is here to fetch out basic islands and have enough basic islands to cast Cryptic Command, and then turn everything else into mountains because you don't really care about it. Then we're on 1 Vendilion Clique, which I think is really good in blue control shells, just as a one of, just as a main deck way to interact, as well as have an evasive threat, and it just gives us a little bit more reach. It's a good 3-drop in a deck where the only 3 drops we really have are going to be our Blood Moons. Then we're on 4 Snapcaster Mages and 1 of Keranos, God of Storms. This card has been in the sideboard of Splinter Twin decks back in the day, of different Blood Moon decks, of control decks with blue and red, because it's an incredibly grindy, slow win condition that in control mirrors allows you a little bit of reach because it's so hard to interact with that you just stick this thing on turn 5 or 6 and you start grinding out your opponent and you win the game eventually. And I think the card's incredibly criminally underplayed, so we're main decking the thing. I at least want to try it, and I think Jace the Mindsculptor into Keranos, probably a pretty unbeatable combination of win conditions. So, of course, like I mentioned, the Snapcasters and the things we're Snapcasting back. We'll start with the low end, 4 Opt, 4 Serum Visions. This allows us to play only like 22 or so lands because we get to draw through our deck quickly, so we can hit our land drops. And it also allows us to dig for our Blood Moons and our Jace, and work our way through our deck to make our draws consistent. We're on 2 Spell Snares, just being able to stop a 2-drop, whether it be against a Thalia for Death and Taxes, or an Eidolon of the Great Revel, or any number of threatening 2-drops in the format, an opposing Snapcaster Mage even. 2 Logic Knots. These could be mana leaks, but I think Logic Knot is just enough upside that it's better in the format, and I'm more comfortable playing with these because they stay better longer into the game, whereas Mana Leak runs out of value pretty early. After about turn 4 or 5, your Mana Leaks are going to start becoming more useless, where Logic Knots are always going to have a little bit more flex to them. Then we're on 4 Lightning Bolts to go with our Snapcaster Mage because we will win games with Bolt, Snap, and Bolt. We're on 4 Remands as part of our counter package. This is just a great tempo card. It allows us to stall our opponent while we do what we do with our threats. We're on 2 Electrolyze. This is really good against creature-based decks, picking off opposing Snapcaster Mages, picking off almost anything in Death and Taxes. This card takes out Athalia plus Flicker Wisp. It's pretty good. It takes out some stuff in Affinity. It can trade with a Goblin Guide or a Swift Spear. It could take out an Eidolon of the Great Revel. It does a lot, and it also replaces itself, which is pretty important. Then we're on 2 of Cryptic Command. Originally, I wanted 3 to 4, but because we're playing Jace, we have a lot of 4-drops, so for curve considerations, we're playing 2. We also get to Snapcaster some number of these back a lot of the time. Then we're on 3 Blood Moons as the sort of reason to play the deck. And then 1 of Engineered Explosives, so we have a very flexible sweeper in our main deck. And then 1 of Abrade. This card's really flexible. I think it's good enough to where we're going to want to play it in our main deck. It's flexible where it's like good against a Tron deck and good against Burn. Not many cards are, so we're playing that. And then we have Jace the Mindsculptor. This card's bananas, and it's incredible that it is now legal to be played in Modern. And now, I know that this shell may seem a little weird for Jace, because a part of what makes Brainstorm so good is the ability to crack a fetch land and shuffle away the bad cards that you don't want. And we're playing a Blood Moon deck, and our fetch lands are going to get shut off after a certain point. And I acknowledge that, and I understand that. But I don't think that's a big enough reason to not want this in this sort of a shell. And I don't think it makes it that much worse, because the games where Blood Moon is really great, it's just going to win the game. Or we're going to play our Blood Moon on turn 3, turn 4 maybe. Our opponent's going to scoop because there's nothing they can do. Or they're going to die a slow death to a Snapcaster Mage, Lightning Bolt. And then we could still grind them out with Jace by Fate Sealing them. Or by bouncing their creatures. The Brainstorm mode isn't as good in that situation with Blood Moon. The games where Blood Moon is not great, we're going to probably avoid casting them and then sideboard them out, and then Jace is probably still going to be fantastic. It's going to be able to Brainstorm, and then we could fetch and shuffle away the extra Blood Moons that we have. So it has like a little bit of play and a little bit of give and take. The games where Blood Moon's really good, Jace is going to be slightly worse, but still pretty good. The games where Blood Moon's really bad, Jace is just going to allow us to shuffle them away when we don't need them. So I think it's a pretty good benefit, and it's absolutely worth playing. We're on 3 of Jace the Mindsculptor instead of the full 4 of, because obviously we can't play 2 at once, and we could shuffle away additional copies with the first copy, so that's not a huge deal. That's our main deck and our core for our whole plan, and I think it's pretty solid. Moving over to the sideboard, we have a pair of Dispels to fight the other Jace decks that'll be in the format. The blue-white, the Jeskai controls, decks like that. This is very good against. It has utility against Burn. It can stop a Lightning Bolt, which is pretty important. Dispel's just a good, solid 1-mana answer. There were considerations for Spell Pierce, but I think Dispel's just better. Then we're on 2 Relic of Progenitus for Tarmogoyf decks, for our opponent's Snapcaster decks, for any graveyard based combo deck, dredge, stuff like that. You need Graveyard Hate no matter what you're trying to do. So we're on Relics. We have a plan where we could trim on the top end, where we could like trim some number of Jace, some number of Blood Moons if they're no good in that matchup. And we play 4 of Young Pyromancer and be full of Serum Visions and Ops and cheap interactive spells and be more aggressive of a deck and actually win that way as like a pseudo Delver style deck. I think this is going to be good in matchups where we're going to want to have a quicker clock against our opponent. In games where our opponents likely are going to be removing a lot of their creature removal from their deck, they're going to be trimming on Fatal Pushes, on Path to Exiles, on Lightning Bolts of their own. Young Pyromancer will shine. So I like this card a lot as a 4 of. It just gives our deck another angle of attack where we don't have to rely on Blood Moon plus Jace. And it just synergizes well. This shell is very interchangeable for a lot of the win conditions. The core of the cantrips plus counter spells plus lightning bolts. You could do a lot of stuff, and Young Pyromancer is just one of the powerful things you could do. Izzet Staticaster is good against elves, it's good against token decks, it's good against death and taxes, it's good against a lot of decks in the format, affinity, stuff like that. So we have access to 2 of those in our sideboard. Anger of the Gods is a card that takes care of a lot of matches, takes care of death and taxes pretty well. It's really good against dredge. It's really good against any creature-based aggro go-wide deck. Pia and Kiran Nalaar, just another way to grind. This gives us some flexibility for the decks that have a lot of removal, and it's just another win condition. And then we have a 1 of Vandal Blast. This is a concession to Affinity. This card is, I think, a little better than Shatterstorm because it's a little more flexible. And we're able to board this in a lot of situations, even against like Tron, perhaps. This card's going to do work. So that is the deck, guys. That is Mindsculptor Blue Moon. I think this deck's going to be sweet. I'm going to try to build it as soon as humanly possible and get out to a modern event. So I'll let you know how it goes. I've tested a very little amount today on Untap. I played against Tron, and it was pretty rough for the Tron player. It just is what it is. I did get beat one game because they turned 3 Tron and then Karned into Ulamog, which no deck can really deal with that. But I was able to grind them out with a combination of Snapcasters, Bolts, and Cryptic Commands, and then Blood Moon in another game. And Jace just felt right at home. I was able to stick a Jace, bounce a Worm Coil, and go about my way. It was pretty sweet. I really enjoyed it so far, and I look forward to playing with it more. Let me know what you guys think down below, and come back and check out the Bloodbraid Elf deck tech that's coming up next. As soon as this video goes up, I'm going to start that one, and we're going to have a little modern sort of extravaganza this week. Thank you guys, and I look forward to hearing from all of you soon. Also, quick reminder before I'm out of here, follow me on Twitter. It's a great place to converse with me. It's at MTGBiggie, and I look forward to hearing from you there as well.